Hi everybody, Golden Era Bookham here. Today I'd like to share with you what I consider to be the very first successful bodybuilding steroid transformation. And yes, this also occurred in the Silver Era, albeit at the end of the Silver Era. The bodybuilder who experienced what is considered the first true steroid transformation was none other than 4 times NABBA Mr. Universe winner Bill Pearl, who passed away 6 months ago. May he rest in peace. Bill dominated the 1950s and 1960s bodybuilding scene, winning multiple titles such as the Mr. America and Mr. Universe titles before retiring. Dubbed as the Olympia Slayer by Nick Miller from Nick Strength and Power, Bill Pearl never won an Olympia title, however beat Sergio Oliva and some of the greatest bodybuilders of the golden era such as Frank Zane and Reg Park in the 1971 Mr. Universe competition. If you have been following my channel, we have learned thus far that the likes of John Grimmick and the York team were experimenting with anabolic steroids and anabolic stacks containing methamphetamines and testosterone as early as 1954 under the supervision of Dr. John Ziegler, with little success, as John Grimmick reported only a stimulant effect from the methamphetamine as I described in my previous video, and no anabolic effect from the testosterone. However, like John Grimmick, by the middle of the 1950s, Silver Era bodybuilders were looking for an edge over their competitors, and one of those bodybuilders was Bill Pearl. Bill Pearl describes his first use of the steroid Nellovar in his books, stating that he began using it in 1956, others say 1959. Either way, it checks out with the history of Nilevar, as coincidentally 1956 was the year that Nilevar was released in the USA as an anabolic steroid. Nilevar was initially used to promote muscle growth and treat severe burns and physical trauma, and even by veterinarians to promote strength and growth in cattle. Arthur Jones apparently suggested the use of steroids to Bill after Arthur found out that the Soviets were using testosterone in their Olympic weightlifting teams in 1954. This, of course, aroused curiosity in Bill, and a veterinarian informed Bill about the drug Nilevar. When asked if he was sure he wanted to take it, Bill famously stated, "If it's good enough for a bull, then it's good enough for me." Bill would only win the NABBA 1956 Mr. Universe Tour class and lost the overall to Jack Dellinger. Bill was looking for an edge to win over the ever larger competitors, and found it through one of the first anabolic steroids ever created, Nellovar. Looking at his physique in the early 1950s, for example, after just winning the Mr. America, we can see that his physique is rather impressive for a natural, but he doesn't look enhanced. Fast forward to 1956 and we can see the anabolic effect of Nellovar rather clearly. Bill's physique is completely transformed and he is just massive. Bill stated that he experimented with Nellovar for 3 months and he put on 30 pounds onto his physique, and it's obvious. Everything grew. His arms, legs, delts, chest, back, everything. And I mean, Bill looks almost bloated in some of these images. Even his abs are starting to stretch a little. Bill Pearl, after having won Mr. Universe and Mr. America in 1953, was looking at getting more massive than ever and was looking for that edge, as reported in this article. Bill would of course play down his steroid use. However, Jerry Branham remembers Bill's transformation clearly and actually confronted Bill about the topic. Here is Jerry Branham in an interview.
Then we got on the subject of steroids, right? And by that time, he had already won that final Mr. Universe contest, which I was congratulated on. He looked great, by the way. And I said to him, Bill, there's one thing that bothers me. Can I be honest with you? He says, go ahead. I said, I see you write in the magazines. You always say that you don't use anabolic steroids. I said, now, Bill, it's only you and me in the room. We've known each other for years. You know how much I admire you as a person. Can you really look me in the eye and tell me that you never used anabolic steroids? Seriously. I won't say anything. I really want to know. Just between you and me. So he looked at me and he said, Jerry, he says, you know how you've admired me since you were a young kid? I said, yes, absolutely. He says, the reason I say that is because there's a lot of young kids all over the place like you who admire me. And if I admitted using anabolic steroids, I'm afraid these kids would use steroids to try and emulate what I did in bodybuilding.
Yeah.
And I feel bad about it. So yeah, I give a little, I give a little white lie. I say that I didn't use steroids.
Yeah.
He said, I said, okay, all right, fine. I perfectly understand. And, I won't say anything, but I know that Bill, I mean, I remember I told him about my scrapbook that I had. I said, I remember seeing pictures of you when you won the 1953 Mr. America. And then I saw a photo of you posing in 1959. And then I saw a picture of you when you won your 61 Mr. Universe in London. I said, in the difference between the 59 and the 61 picture, you look like you put on 40 pounds of muscle, solid muscle. I said, you went from being like an average size bodybuilder to a tremendous bodybuilder.
Yeah.
Basically what happened was, I found out later, Bill Pearl tells the story. I think it's in that autobiography. He claims that around 1959, he came across a sort of a doctor who was working out of a veterinary school up in University of California, Davis Veterinary School. And the guy told him about a new class of drugs called anabolic steroids. And he told Bill Pearl about a particular oral steroid called Nilevar. And so Bill Pearl started using Nilevar. And supposedly, Bill Pearl tells the story that it was Nilevar. He admitted using Nilevar, and he admitted it did put on some muscle,
Yeah.
So,
because I think that was in a magazine long ago, before it became such a no-no.
Yeah, it was also in the magazine. Now, you see, if you know anything about anabolic steroids, a lot of people don't know that much about steroids. And the thing is, Nilevar is it's an oral steroid. It's a mild steroid. Nilevar is not the type of steroid that's going to put on like 30 pounds of muscle.
Like Dianabol, huh?
Yeah, it's not like Dianabol. It was kind of a weak steroid. So, I'm not saying Bill Pearl is lying, and he might have also taken testosterone without admitting it. That's all speculation. But on the other hand, Bill Pearl, to his credit, and people overlook this when they talk about steroids, is that Bill Pearl trained very heavy, very hard, and very consistently. Bill Pearl used to use like over 300 pounds of press behind the neck. He would do dumbbell curls with like 75, 80 pounds. When you're lifting that kind of weight and you're taking even small amounts of steroids, you are going to put on a lot of muscle. Because, so it's very...
Especially if you've got his genetics.
Yeah, Bill Pearl had great genetics.
I mean, his brother was huge, wasn't he? And he didn't even train, except for a little while.
So that was Jerry Branham on Bill Pearl's steroid transformation with Nilevar. Now, what is Nilevar? Nilevar is the brand name for norethindrolone and was first synthesized at GD Cell Company in 1953 and was originally studied as a progestin for hormonal birth control and menopausal hormone therapy, but ultimately was not marketed as such. It was supposed to be also taken by mouth, and in 1955 it was re-examined for testosterone-like activity and was found to have similar anabolic activity to testosterone, but only 1/16 of the androgenic potency. And if you've been paying attention to some of my recent videos, this is exactly what the scientific community was looking for. They were looking for a compound that would mimic testosterone anabolic-like activity, but with a reduced androgenic potency. So Nilevar was perfect for this. And for this reason, Nilevar had the anabolic activity that Silver Era bodybuilders had been looking for and led to the phenomenal transformation that Bill Pearl experienced. Norethindrolone was introduced for medical use as an anabolic steroid in 1956 and was the first so-called anabolic steroid with a favorable separation of anabolic and androgenic effects to be marketed. It was followed by normethandrone as a progestin in 1957 and by the more well-known anabolic steroid nandrolone phenylpropionate in 1959. Norethindrolone was introduced in the United States in the late 1950s under the name Nilevar, but was discontinued in this country in the 1960s due to limited sales. Although it was introduced into Europe and certain other markets, it was withdrawn in many countries in the 1980s due to concerns of cholestatic jaundice. Today, the drug still remains available only in France in Europe. It is likely that Bill Pearl would continue to use Nellovar throughout his career, as well as other steroids like testosterone, as Jerry Branham stated in this interview, as he only got more massive with time. Just look at these images and footage of Bill Pearl in the subsequent universes of 1961, 1967, and 1971, where he was, in all honesty, just massive. He was huge. It is well known that he also distributed performance-enhancing drugs in his gym to serious lifters. Here is a snippet from one of his ex-clients and friends, Iron Vegan, who you can find on YouTube.
Were those guys, Bill Pearl take drugs, and all this kind of stuff? Let me tell you, it was the 1970s, and the drugs weren't what they are today. But, you had Dianabol, little blue pills, 5 milligrams each. You had depo-testosterone injections, Decadurabolin, people just called it Deca. I mean, there were things back then that it was being used. Bill Pearl was on it, on those things. I mean, these people, bodybuilders are such that they want every advantage they can get. And so they do it. And it just wasn't talked about then. It was just the culture. You don't talk about that stuff. I've been asked about Doug Brignoli. Doug Brignoli, he started there at Pearl's shortly after I did, and he was in his mid-teens. Yeah, he was skinny as a stick initially. And, Bill Pearl was relatively skinny too when he started out, but that was years before I knew him. He had just was about to win his 4th Mr. Universe title when I joined the gym, or just after I joined the gym, he was doing that. So, yeah, Bill used the drugs, Jim Morris used the drugs, Doug Brignoli used the drugs, and guys, people think, well, these guys don't talk about it. Bill didn't talk about how all the drugs he was using in his big, thick Keys to the Inner Universe book. Doug Brignoli didn't talk about all the drugs he was using in his the Physics of Resistance exercise book. They don't mention it, and it was the culture at the time, and it's still in my mind, like, well, you don't talk about the steroids you're using or anything like that,
Further, his most famous apprentice, Chris Dickerson, is known to have used a cocktail of performance-enhancing drugs to win the Mr. Olympia competition in 1982, which will be the subject of the next video. Having said all that, I am not trying to take anything away from the greatness of Bill Pearl. In my eyes, he is still one of the greatest bodybuilders that ever lived, a true legend of the Iron Game. Bill Pearl, like many Silver Era and Golden Era bodybuilders, seemed to have used the bare minimum to get the job done, so to speak. Bill lived a very long life and died at the age of 91, which is unusual nowadays with bodybuilders, which likely reflects the little dependence the Silver and Golden Era bodybuilders had on drugs. Silver Era and Golden Era bodybuilders also trained extremely heavy to build mass in the off-season, and Bill was known to use 600 pounds on the squat, 400 pounds on the bench press, and 300 pounds on the overhead press. I'm not talking about max reps. These were his work sets. So he was really, really strong. So I do hope you have enjoyed this video on the first documented and successful steroid transformation. And I'm pretty sure that by the mid to late 50s, many bodybuilders were starting to use the earlier forms of steroids. And perhaps this was not the very first steroid transformation ever, but it surely was one of the first documented and successful ones, as Bill Pearl would then go on to win several Mr. Universe titles with the assistance of Nilevar and possibly other performance-enhancing drugs. If you have enjoyed watching this series on the history of steroids, then please give the video a like, subscribe, and leave me a comment. That's it from me. This is the Golden Era Bookworm saying bye for now. Head to www.goldenerabookworm.com for the biggest range of classic old school bodybuilding books as ebooks, e-magazines such as Iron Man and Reg Park Journal, high quality bodybuilding posters of the Golden Era stars, merchandise and classic gymwear featuring Steve Reeves, Marvin Eder, John Grimmick, Reg Park, and many other Golden Era stars. For those wishing to build a classic physique, lose fat, and build muscle, online training is also available. Collectibles such as rare autographed photos from the Golden Era stars are also available, and to collaborate, please get in touch. As a natural bodybuilder, it is imperative to know your own testosterone levels, as they are a reflection of the anabolic environment created by your diet and training. I would highly recommend using the male hormone test kit from Let's Get Checked, and make sure you use my code GOLDEN30 for a 30% discount. Again, the advantage of checking yourself regularly is that you will know how well your body is anabolically primed to put on the much desired muscle you are working for. Not all of us have the time to go to a gym or the opportunity to have a coach to teach us one-on-one, but with the Future Fitness app, it's like having a personal trainer in your living room. From February 11th onwards, you can try the Future Fitness app for only $19 for the first month. Think of what you can accomplish during that first month. So go on and hit my link at tryfuture.co/GEB to get started.